even unmoderated testing could be pretty slow. And the development of vibe coding is pretty fast. And I guess what is the value of this usability testing? Is that still worth you slowing down your development to do this kind of usability testing to get the feedback?
I think for certain, again, going to depend on the product you're building itself. But then when the churn data actually came in 1 month in, a few months in, if you look at it on a net basis, we were far lower, maybe 20% lower in terms of the overall ARR or the revenue that we'd be making had we stayed on the same price. So that was a huge failure, which looked like an early success to start with.
So one argument is that big or small, before you launch your product to your customers, you should get it tested. And the other side is saying, if it's small enough, we don't need to get it tested. What's your opinion on this phenomenon where vibe coders just say, if we get it wrong, we rip it apart? On the other side, we said experiences need to be protected, big or small. What's your opinion on that? Welcome to UX Stories. I'm your host, Lihong Hicken. I spent my career obsessed with how we understand what users actually think. When Chris and I helped scale usertesting.com from zero to IPO, we thought we figured it out. But AI has changed everything. The speed of building is now 10 times faster than the speed of listening. So Chris and I said, we want to use vibe testing to match the speed of vibe coding. I'm here to talk to visionary leaders who want to deliver great experiences to their customers. My guest today is Naveen Mohan, product manager and head of monetization at Otter.ai. Naveen has a fascinating background. He has a Carnegie Mellon alum with a deep foundation as data scientist. Most people move from data to product to get away from the numbers. But I suspect Naveen moved to product to find the human logic behind the numbers. Naveen, I'm obsessed with learning of people. I want to understand why people do what they do. You come from, a scientist background. So as a product manager, coming from science, what are you actually obsessed with? In another word, like what kind of product builder are you?
Great to be here, Leong, and thank you for having me on. Yeah, it's an interesting question. It's really come together and never really sat and thought about it, but I'll try and put my answer together. So like you mentioned, I've always been into data, machine learning, AI, and also a builder at heart. So I did my undergraduate in computer science, built a bunch of apps, worked with customers and clients, had a mini agency on my side. So I've always been passionate in that mix of technology and business. And you add data and experimentation to it, it was a good combination. And I felt like the product role was something that really helped me shine on all those fronts. And I naturally gravitated towards that. It took me a few years, and I love data, and I find that is a superpower that helps me in everything I do on my day-to-day role as PM, especially in monetization, where it's like pricing and it's more metrics and experimentation heavy.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think it's both ways. I think I gravitated towards it, and also the position ended up being a good fit for the skills I had. Yeah.
So you go from one number to the other number to the number with the dollar signs. So cool. That's awesome. Great to have you on the show. Today's episode is very interesting. So usually on our show, we have product managers talking about user testing on their prototype to make sure that product works. And, on the last episode, we have product manager, product marketing people talking about, testing the go-to-market, A/B testing on competitors' insight. But you deal with the most sensitive part of the user journey, the price, right? This is where the vibe meet the wallet. So in the world of vibe coding, everything's so fast. How do you test a pricing model? You can't throw out I figure that it's going to be very difficult to test a pricing model. You can't put out a price and then order a user test, do a think aloud testing, say, okay, which pricing model do you like, A or B? Because I figure like people might be lying. whichever pricing you throw out, they'll be like, it's too expensive. So how do you go about testing the pricing model?
I think there's few different ways of found works, and I'm sure there's plenty more. There's your traditional, let's say traditional, but something that's been used, like surveys and Van Westendorp and other methods of arriving at a price and talking to the users and surveying users and trying to come up with a range that people would pay. But I've also found complementing that with A/B testing prices work. Again, there's a lot of things to keep in mind as you're thinking about how do you test live with users, and then arriving at the prices that you want to test also is a bit of an art and science. I usually look at a few different signals. You look at the value that the product is providing and how the users are consuming or using the product, because not all products are going to be used in the same way. Sometimes I think the pricing is closely tied to the pricing model as well, in terms of, is it usage based, seat based, is it somewhere hybrid or something else altogether, right? So you take a few of those and then you look at your competition as well to get a sense of the market, and you have your own philosophy. Do you want to be in the upper tier of the market, or is your product more aimed at the lower end of customers? So you take all those and then come up with a few different prices that you want to test and build your hypothesis to say that these are potential prices that I could test, and go ahead and roll it out. And I think, yeah. And
So
again,
that's very interesting. So you talk about how you come up with a hypothesis, which is gathering information on the competitors. You have your hypothesis, you have your theories, and maybe your model. Maybe is the C license, maybe is users license, how product are being used. So you have these hypotheses, and now is like, let's test it. So, and then test it is like, do you test it by putting out to the real user to test it? Or you test it with some hypothesis user? Like typically, I done some pricing testing as well in the past. My last 3 to 4, 5 startups, I was in the forehand of pricing testing. And, at some startup, I changed like 11 rounds of pricing in a period of 7 months. It's kind of bizarre. The way I typically do it is, like you do, I research the market, come up with my hypothesis, and then come up with the pricing model. What I did is, I don't want to put in front of customer without any feedback, and I don't want to put in front of friends and family, internal people. I want to put it in total stranger, but in the target audience. So I will go to, at that time I have usertesting.com employee benefit, right? So I go to usertesting.com and order it's usually like 20, 25 people in my target audience. And then I show them a little bit what we do, and then the value prop, and show them the pricing. Ask them, show them the pricing, ask them, what do you think this pricing means? Which plan do you think they will buy? What how likely would you buy? So basically like gather some like raw reactions, and also listen to how they describe, what vocabulary they use to describe. And then I'll use some of the vocabulary they use to describe my pricing, and use their vocabulary to swap out with some of the word I use to describe my price on some of my features. Just use their word to describe it, and do a few rounds of this until I come up with something I like. And then I put it into my salespeople's hand and test it, battle test it, and then do a few more rounds until I close a few more deal, and then keep iterating on that. So until I get to a price that I like it. So that's how I do it. It's like, it's so brutally painful and not scientific as I would wish. So how do you sit? I was hoping a more scientific way than my manual way of doing it.
and again, as I mentioned, there are techniques that you probably leveraged when like talking to users or potential prospective customers and trying to get a range of prices that would be fair based on the value they're going to derive from the product, etc., and then come up with some prices. What I've found is that, and might be pretty obvious to a lot of people, that when you ask people who are not the actual users, or who might not actually be signing up to use your product, they might quote prices or be okay with certain prices and give you an idea that these are prices they might pay for, but their actual behavior when they actually need a product like that might be completely different. So what I've found is it's helpful as one more data point, talking to users or talking to potential target customers and trying to get a sense of what is the price they would pay. But to your point, the final test is actually putting it in front of your actual customers and asking them to pay and getting some information on that. Granted, it's a bit more easy when you have a larger volume of customers, especially in the self-serve motion, for example, where say you have a decent amount of people coming visitors to your site and some good amount of traction and distribution, you're able to put it in front of them and maybe test a couple of prices. It's a bit harder with the sales side of thing when you're putting it in the hands of salespeople and the pipeline is a bit smaller. I still think that doing that will give you far more information than the initial surveying and speaking to prospective users. I'm curious as to when you did come up with a range of pricing and then you battle tested it, did you usually find a lot of
I think for me, it's more not about the price point. It's more about like how clear the pricing is. Do the people understand what the price is? How like do they? A lot of time it's not like the price high or low. It's more like do they know what it means? And also, I have a rule, the calculator rule. If the customer had to pull out the calculator to calculate how much they had to pay, you have failed. So like they need to be able to feel like, oh, in my situation, I need to pick this plan, or my price is this. Like especially on the usage base or C base, like if the price is so complicated, they need to use a calculator that you lost. So that's kind of what it's for me. I'm testing on clarity and ease of understanding of the price. The perception is like, oh, the first impression, oh, like they need to feel like the price doesn't need to be expensive or low. They need to feel cheap or feel fair. It doesn't need to be really fair or really cheap. It needs to be feel right. So that's my three kind of rule. The clear, easy to and feels fair. That's
Yeah, I
but
think predictability, and for that part, like your model itself, battle testing your pricing model, it's really helpful to put it in front of potential customers or customer lookalikes, if you will, and trying to see if the three things you mentioned, clarity, transparency, and how easy it is for them to understand what they're going to be paying, or at least get a ballpark, is helpful. Even if you're not able to hone in on the exact price, they might be willing to pay.
yeah, exactly. And the price is, well, I guess as scientists love experience that fails because failure teach us something, right? So can you share a time when your monetization system produced a result you didn't expect? Maybe the data pricing tier would be a hit, but you observe your users trying to choose a plan, realize, oh, that doesn't work. And then it changed the way, do your pricing system.
There's a few different examples that come to my mind over
Sure, go.
the last maybe. Maybe I'll highlight one. So usually, people are always pushing when you have the leadership, you have the board and others also pushing to say that there's always more room to expect, like push the prices higher. But that might not always be the answer. Again, it depends on a lot of different things. But we still wanted to test higher prices for one of our plans. And we did see an uptick in conversions, to at least uptick in conversions and ARR that we are driving, at least initially, if not to the level of the price increase. Usually there's a conversion drop, we saw an increase. But what we also realized is if we did a month to get the churn data, we saw a huge increase in churn as well. And initially, as expected, when we saw the conversion go up with the price increase, everybody felt validated and they felt like, oh, we'd left so much money on the table so far, and we're all almost celebrating. But then when the churn data actually came in, 1 month in, a few months in, if you look at it on a net basis, we were far lower, maybe 20% lower in terms of the overall ARR or the revenue that we'd be making had we stayed on the same price. So that was a huge failure, which looked like an early success to start with. Even though the conversions increased over the period of time, we saw that it impacted expansions. People are more careful to add seats at a higher price. And then more people are also were churning as a result. So
Wow.
I think the biggest lesson from there is to not jump to conclusions when just based on the initial conversion data. To give it time, I think teams have become pretty good at looking at longer term effects, but sometimes there's still the pull towards making a call early or rolling it out as soon as you see one part of the funnel pick up as a result. But it's always good to wait and get the churn data, get the retention data, and make the call based on that.
Yeah, totally. That's a very good data point because like my three principle compared to you wouldn't work because it only work with the first impression when they feel like it's a fair price. But then after the customer who work with you for a year, by the time they renew, right, that feeling settled because they compare with how much value they go with you and the price they had. If they feel like, oh, the value I get and the price I'm is not fair, that will cause the churn rate to go up. So like in terms of when you are making the price, it will impact the churn rate down the road or renewal rate down the road. In that case, I was thinking maybe you could have a legacy customer pricing to kind of contain the impact of the pricing change. I don't know, like it's a little bit delicate thing.
I think it's a bit more tricky, especially when you have public artifacts, pricing pages, etc., which showcase a new price maybe lower than what your legacy customers are paying, for example, or high or different. I think those are operational challenges that you have to handle. And also, what do you do if you decide not to go with the new prices that you're testing? How do you handle that group of people? Do you just let them continue to be on the same price or move them over, which again can cause friction, churn, because they signed up on a different price. Now you're moving them over to a different price potentially. So
yeah, totally. So we talk a lot about, you are basically in the business of listening, right? Ota is in the business of listening. We are in the business of listening, and you are in the, understanding the pricing, the value. We're both in the business of understanding what users think. So I see that you use a lot of data, like, product users data. You have a lot of survey data. Do you also uses usability testing, which is, I know, a lot of company like usertesting.com is order tests, observe what users do, watch their behavior and listen to what they think aloud, kind of those think aloud video, and using that to help you research your users, build your products, come up with those experiences. Do you do that as part of your building product process, or do you not at Otter?
we do actually, and maybe not always for certain things which are more smaller tweaks, but we try and maximize or when we use that functionality to put it in front of some users. There are different ways in which we do that. One is with prototypes, for example, or even like lo-fi mocks, where we showcase a particular feature or a surface that we're thinking of changing, updating, and get the thoughts and listen to the users and their reactions about it, what they say as well as what they do when we put it in front of them. So there is that. And then you also have the beta testing period when we have a slightly more mature MVP that we've integrated into our product. And then we can roll it out to a few users to try and get feedback from them as well. And then you also listen to all the customers that are current users once we've rolled out certain features. There's always a stream of inputs, either from surveys that we are running to our subscribers or people that are trying after they cancel their subscriptions, providing feedback. So we do look at all that and treat that
That's
as good.
awesome. How do you do usability testing today? Do you do manual scheduling of meeting with people so that, or do you do kind of systematic moderated testing,
It's a combination. Again, we do it on a case-by-case basis. I think we leverage more unmoderated, automated
Okay,
testing
cool. That's great.
as much as possible for the smaller features. For the bigger ones, we also have more moderated live sessions where we're able to
Okay.
view and also hear directly from the customer.
Cool. I want to hear your opinion about this common thing, that common opinion that brought in by vibe coding. So in the past, when I think at least like 13 years ago, a lot of people would do more frequent usability testing, especially for like ideally they want to do the prototype, the testing. And the idea at that time was to protect engineering time, right? But I've seen a lot of teams, especially vibe coding teams, stop doing that. And the reasoning behind that is for smaller things, we don't need to do that because it's small. Like small things, small changes, we don't need to do that because engineering time doesn't need to be protected as much because vibe coding. If we guess it wrong, we just rip it apart and do it. On the other hand, it's not the engineering time you need to protect it, but it's the experiences you deliver to customers, small or big, that need to be protected. So one argument is that big or small, before you launch your product to your customers, you should get it tested. And the other side is saying, if it's small enough, we don't need to get it tested. What's your opinion on this phenomenon where vibe coders just say, if we guess it wrong, we rip it apart? On the other side, we said experiences need to be protected, big or small. What's your opinion on that?
I think I'm on the side of rolling it out. Again, that's with a caveat if you have enough users that you can get for smaller features, and also how you define big and small features also differs. In my mind, at least, smaller features are either in terms or mainly in terms of the users impacted. It could be a really small, like a button, for example, but maybe it's 100,000 users using it on a daily basis to try and upload out there. That I could still consider as big, and some level of testing would help. Whereas if it's a very small portion of your user base uses, and so I'm trying to capture how I would define small and more look at the impacted and the percentage of people using it, for example, could be a signal to use, and then use that to determine, instead of saying, okay, it's just a button or just using the feature itself to define it, it should be relative to users being impacted and how critical it is to their workflow and how often it is being used. So for things that are lower impact to the users, I would lean towards rolling it out, being able to test it directly. Of course, assuming that you're still holding up the standards and this review processes within the company or the product team to stop from shipping slop, for example. But yeah.
Right. Okay, cool. That's awesome. Great. That's awesome. And I guess in today's, fast moving world, usability testing can be pretty slow. You schedule people, do the moderated testing. Even unmoderated testing could be pretty slow. And the development of vibe coding is pretty fast. And I guess what is the value of this usability testing? Is that still worth you slowing down your development to do this kind of usability testing to get the feedback?
I think for certain, again, it's going to depend on the product you're building itself. So if it's a product that you can relate and you use on a relatively regular basis, and you can relate to the user base a bit more, I think that gives you stronger intuition. Generally, I found that's easier to build intuition as to what features your user base might find helpful. But if you're building for a user base which you traditionally aren't a part of, or you can't relate to as much, in that world, I strongly believe that user testing, even though it might take a little bit longer time, provided it's a large impact feature or feature that impacts a lot of people, I think there's still value in that. So
basically, larger, more impactful feature, yes, do usability testing. Smaller ones, not so much.
and also it depends on your ICP and your target users.
Yeah.
For example,
Cool.
if it's just an application that you're building for purely accountants, for example. And most people on the team are not an accountant and they don't use the workflows that they're building as often. I think it's helpful to get inputs from actual accountants or related professions and people using the product.
You talk about a lot of the features. I mean, I've been thinking pricing is very impactful experiences, right? It's not a feature per se. It's very important. Is that worth user testing?
I think yes, but there can be other ways of testing it. When you say user testing, assuming you
I
mean
mean, like before rolling out to the real user, like test it with a small 20, 50 sample user before rolling out to the real world, right? It's like sure we'll get a lot of insight, but once you roll it out to the world, those people's experience cannot be recalled. It's done.
yeah, I think it could be used as a data point, but I think where it differs from some of the other features, and again, this can be true of a lot of features, is there's a difference when people say they would pay for it versus they actually putting the credit card or a payment type down to pay for it. So, which is
Clear that those is already live customers already out there. You are going out raw. It's live. I'm saying like if pricing is so important, why don't you user test it? At least making sure they understand what it means. Are they clear? Do they need to pull out calculator? Will that impact the existing customers' churn behavior before you actually boom going out, right? It's like, oh, that's like it because it's such a big decision. Like pause a moment and think of that
and I
really.
think there's also a bit of nuance, at least in my mind, with respect to that. The first time, or when you're trying to hone in on how do you actually want to price a product like fresh for the first time or the first couple of times when you have not a great idea of the price range that your product would fit in or the model that you're trying to go with, I think it's really helpful to start there. But once you do have something that you put out there and you have a baseline that you can test against, I at least I think that you get more signal from rolling it out. Of course, any signal that you can get from a smaller group of users would be helpful, but I think I've found it more helpful to go to users directly, roll it out and test. But yeah.
Cool. That's great. Well, that's cool. Well, let's go into some rapid fire questions. What is your go-to usability testing toolkit for your team right now?
It's been user testing account and yeah. So
That's,
that's been mainly it. But yeah, we're always looking at what else we could use.
oh, that's awesome. If you had a magical wand, what's one piece of human intent data you wish you could see in a dashboard every morning?
I think the perception of the brand, and we've been talking about pricing and being relative, like immediately be able to tell to the users, find a particular product along with the price valuable and where in the scale of value does it fall.
Ah,
Would be amazing.
okay. Cool. That's awesome. And then just to wrap up, what is the most fulfilling part of being a product builder?
There's a few. I think being able to put things out there that users use on a daily basis or that helps make users' lives better is something that I really enjoy. And also being able to hear from your, not just power users, but from all users, it's always fun when someone comes up to you and they're like, I'm a user of Otter, Adobe, what have you. And, and you hear from them as to how it's helping them, or they even share feedback and suggestions. It's, yeah, I love that. And that keeps me going. So
That's awesome. Great. So basically fulfilling, satisfy users' needs and want, making happy users. You just like doing that. Cool. Awesome, Naveen. Thank you for joining our show and thank you for showing us the science behind the paywall. And for those listening, if you are ready to start vibe testing the value proposition at the speed you code, visit us at theysaid.io to start free user testing. I'm Lihong Hicken, and this is US Stories. I will see you at the next episode.